Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for what I've called the Fraud Forum. Today, we're going to discuss important things that home buyers and sellers should know about potential fraudulent transactions and also how title companies help prevent fraudulent transactions from happening. So, to help me today, I have Christina Robinson with me. Christina Robinson is the Senior Regional Manager for Capital Title Insurance Agency. She's been a title professional for over 25 years. Christina started her career in the Wayne County offices as a title clerk and also worked in the Oakland and Macomb County offices when everything was in books or on film in her earlier years. She was also a title examiner before she crossed over to the escrow side of things, which is very rare. Christina is well versed in commercial and residential real estate transactions. She has a degree in marketing and is a CLTP, which is a certified land title professional. That is a designation given by the Michigan Land Title Association, which is the association that protects and educates the title industry. Christina was also the education chair for the MLTA's Education Committee for the 2024 to 2025 year. She stepped down this year because she was recently promoted from regional manager to senior regional manager for Capital Title.
Mhm.
And that was important for her so she could make sure that she was able to focus more on her teams and customers through her management team.
Mhm.
Christina enjoys what she does because at its core, she enjoys being part of the home buying and selling process. So thank you, Christina, for being here. I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, so the first question, of course, is how often do you experience some level of fraud in real estate transactions?
Yes. Real estate transactions and fraud basically happens every day. Now, not necessarily with Capital Title, but Capital Title has um, multiple underwriters and they give us notifications of fraudulent transactions so that we can be aware of what's going on. And we get notifications from various underwriters all the time. So it's happening extremely often.
If you've enjoyed watching this video and would love to stay up to date when I have more content like this or something similar that you may be interested in, please like and subscribe to this channel and click the bell so you get notifications. And I hope you have a great day. Okay. Um, and what would you say the top reasons a buyer or seller benefits from the title company ensuring on their side of things that the other party isn't trying to commit fraud in the transaction?
Well, it familiarity. So this is what we do. We have the tools, we have the technology, we have the experience, we have the sphere with our underwriters and the information that comes through them. So as opposed to a buyer and seller agreeing to a transaction where they won't have a title company involved, the exposure is just so much greater. So we use our technology, we use our skill sets, we use all of the things in every transaction to do our best to prevent fraud.
Okay. How often do you see it where a seller tries to sell a home that they don't actually own? And what's in place for title companies to prevent that fraudulent seller from actually selling the home?
Sure. So the biggest thing that we're very aware of and that happens the most often is vacant land fraud. Because, as a realtor, if you have a buyer, if they want to buy the land, if there's a for sale sign on it, there's no door to knock on. You aren't really seeing that seller. So a lot of times they will, the fraudulent sellers will be people out of town. When they're speaking with their realtor is often asking them for information and they aren't quite giving it, or they're trying to kick the can down the road and not give it right away. So we do have some technology, and if you were to call me and say, "Hey, Christina, I'm just not sure about this seller," what we do is we send them like an ID verification. And through that ID verification, we can start to see if that person is still kind of trying to stay away from that, saying, "No, I'll provide my ID at closing." Those are all red flags. So once we have too many red flags, if we can't confirm the identity, obviously, we can't stop any transactions, but we can share our feelings or our thoughts on the situation and say, you may not want to proceed with this seller because the information that they're providing or lack thereof is just insufficient.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I had one where, he didn't live here, but it worked out. I wasn't concerned because I had already helped him purchase it years ago.
Hmm.
I figured he was the same person.
Yeah.
Um, what happens if the buyer purchased a home where the previous title company had a fraudulent transaction with that seller, and now the buyer wants to sell the home, but they're not using that title company, and you're uncovering those issues?
So as long as they had an owner's policy, they would be able to make a claim with that underwriter. And because Capital Title has multiple underwriters, even though they may be trying to work through that for that buyer when the fraud happened to when now they're a seller, the underwriters may be able to allow us to proceed with that buyer's sale. So now that they're a seller, so they aren't losing their buyer. Um, and so what they would do is they would work to try to see where the fraud happened. Because at this point, if a buyer owns a home, and let's just say in this scenario, they've lived there for 2 or 3 years, because that's what typically happens, it's likely that that seller or that proper owner of that home may have been deceased or incapacitated, not much family or something like that. So once we find out that there has been fraud, it would go to that initial underwriter, and then we would try to work with that underwriter to see if we can get it closed for the new buyer.
And does that typically take longer to close, or is it not
It
that?
could, it could, like I said, because unless fraud has to be known, it can't be suspected. So if your purchaser, now seller, has lived in that house for 2, 3 years, it would depend on how we learned of the fraud. Was the person away? Did they live in Europe for 3 years? And they just never had anyone checking on the property. So it will really depend on the scenario as to how long it could take and that sort of thing. And so the underwriters would work through that claim to try to make that owner, that prior owner that had fraud done against them, whole, and to make that buyer who was unsuspecting of the fraud whole as well.
Okay. And what are the most common things that come up when detecting whether something is fraudulent in transaction or not?
Um, Once again, vacant land, that's a huge one. Sellers out of state, sellers out of the country. It's a red flag, but it doesn't mean that it's actual fraud. It's just a red flag. I mean, like you said, in your situation, you knew them. So although they were out of state, it can happen. You don't have to live in the property to be the proper owner. But we just look for situations where if the agent has never met the seller, if the buyer has never met the seller, because, there are situations where they say, oh, I'm going to be out of town every time something is supposed to happen. They only want to talk. The agent tries to call them on like a two-way audio visual, like FaceTime or something like that. They're never available for that. So situations where that person or persons just seems to always be unavailable, it starts to raise an eyebrow.
Yeah, because that's another thing too, is I have some people that it is mostly email or text only just because they have a big language barrier.
Hmm.
So on the phone, they wouldn't be able to make it happen.
Absolutely.
But um, that is what it is too sometimes.
Absolutely.
Um, so outside of what you already mentioned, what are some of the steps that you would take to determine if it appears to be potential fraud or it's not fraud?
Yeah. So, one huge thing that we do in our industry now is we have the ability to people search, when you're looking like private investigators and that sort of thing. So when it's vacant land, sometimes we send a letter. We send a letter to that person's last known address, like on People Finder or People Search or something like that. And we say, hey, we've received some information that you might be selling this home. And so if it's going to that last known address and we open up that line of communication, we never have had a situation where someone is agitated by that. They're typically very appreciative. They're very happy for the additional steps that are taking place because if you call, a number, unless it's a number you find on one of those services, what happens is there are so many spoof things. Like people can make it look like they're calling you from a number that they're not actually calling you from. So we try to use, sometimes you go old school, you send a letter, please respond, please do this. Like, we understand you're selling this property, we want to assist, but we also want to protect you.
Yeah, that spoofing thing is something else. It happens to me all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very, very annoying. And if I wasn't, careful, there's definitely some things I could have went through with and lost money and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Um, okay, so in regards to wire fraud,
Mm-hmm.
I always, especially with the buyers, I meet with them and let them know that you can, with capital title, you can do a cashier's check up to $1 million if you need to, which most title companies don't allow.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do decide to wire the funds, always call the title company directly, verify the fund that that information is correct before you send the money.
Mm-hmm.
Because there has been, I mean, I don't know, that's my question to you, but there has been a history of fraudulent transactions where the a hacker will hack a realtor's email, say send the funds
Mm-hmm.
here, not there. They've done that. They don't get the money back, and they can no longer close. So I do feel better when they do go to cashier checks. Okay, at least
Yes.
the money is here, and hopefully they didn't do
Yes.
a project cashier check. But are you seeing it still or a lot, or is it shortened where, people are still getting, realtors are still getting hacked in their emails, and then buyers are getting an email that says send the funds here instead?
Yes, it's happening quite often, and it can start as soon as a purchaser or a potential purchaser looking at homes before they even make a decision to contact a realtor. And so the hackers are very sly, and they will watch your email for months, even a year or so, until they see something actually pop up that they can really start following.
Mm.
And so it is, we tend to think of fraud as something that happens instantly in a short amount of time. But like, if you look at the technology on your phone, sometimes you'll get those messages that says, "Hey, this password has been found on some unscrupulous websites or in some places. You might want to change it." Change your passwords. Change your passwords. Change them often. Um, but to your point, we send out wire instructions through encryption. And I know that most people, they get annoyed. I can't open this. What's my password? This sort of thing. But when you're making the largest purchase of your life at that time in your life, that annoyance is very important. It should be, somewhat challenging to get to the information about your transaction. So we always send our wire instructions through encryption. We always remind our realtor partners to not forward wired instructions, to always give us that buyer's email address so that we can send them directly, and so that they can open those wire instructions and give us a call. And if they still feel uneasy, then, you would know the number to Capital Title. And you, through your experience, you would say, no, you would not receive any change wire instructions. And we also like to know when that happens, because if it's happened on one transaction, sometimes our IT partners can, find those IP addresses and that sort of thing. And so we do report things to the FBI.
Okay, that's good to know. And I think I was told before that if your email is just like, Gmail or Yahoo.com, and it's not like you've set up your own company email, it's more likely to get hacked. Is that right?
So I don't know that for a fact. That's not something that I specialize in, but I do know that sometimes people can purchase domain names. So I wouldn't get too comfortable in that, because sometimes that domain name is still through a Yahoo or Gmail based service. It just appears to look different. But I would say that every person that's conducting business through their email should make sure that they're doing everything that they can to prevent their email from being hacking. And if there are services for, like, if you have your own email domain, to make sure that it's a reputable service, and so that that is not just a cover for something that is easier to get through.
Yeah, because they can easily just buy the domain name and make one little letter off, and it still looks like
Hmm.
the email.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so it used to be, cashier's checks weren't, to a certain amount weren't allowed for the buyer to pay a portion of their closing costs. But now it's a bigger thing again.
Hmm.
Because I think it was because there was a lot of fraud with
Wire
cashier's
fraud.
checks.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely fraud.
so either one, right? But what happens if for some reason you do get a buyer or if the seller has to bring funds to closing that they are giving you a cashier's check? A
That's
fraudulent cashier's check, sorry.
yes, yes, yes. So, knock on wood, we haven't experienced a fraudulent cashier's check yet. What we have experienced is a person that put a stop pay on a cashier's check. And as it turns out, the bank was at fault because they didn't actually have the physical cashier check in their possession. And that is one of their policies for the particular bank that we were working with. That person was required to have received the original cashier's check back, or they do an extensive hold on it before they release the funds back. So fraudulent cashier's checks, we can never be certain. We take them with a certain amount of assuming integrity on behalf of the clients, and we have the privilege of being an affiliate in business with Real Estate One. So our primary pool is going to be real estate professionals. And so typically real estate professionals tend to bring in a client base that is not typically doing fraud, but everyone is susceptible to it, obviously. If we see a cashier's check, because we do have closer professionals that receive those checks at the closing table, if they do receive a cashier's check that looks different from one that they've never seen before, if it appears to be missing information, if the characters on the check are all different, if it does not have some characteristics that a cashier's check would typically have, we will take additional steps to contact that bank to verify that check in that moment. And if we are unable to, then we won't be able to proceed and we may require a wire transfer. If we have a situation where that has happened, then we definitely would have to get our attorneys involved. And then because at that point it's fraud and it is fraud on a federal level. And so we would bring in federal authorities to try to work through that issue.
Yeah, that's a good point there because actually the deal I closed today, it was
Hmm.
cash. I
Hmm.
know that my buyer's gonna have the funds because I've helped her before. But she was very concerned about wiring the funds to the title
Hmm.
company because her husband recently had wire fraud happen to him.
Hmm.
And I let her know, I said, well, there may not be a way around it, but call the title company, make sure it's right.
Yeah.
And they did override, but she'd have to give the check the day before.
Hmm.
And there was a whole thing with her bank where they were telling her, well, you shouldn't be giving them money ahead of time, this and that. So that freaked her out even more. So she almost didn't want to give the check the day before. They
Yes.
told her, they said, oh, well, they can just call and verify. And I was thinking in my mind, I'm like, well, because I had talked to you earlier about this. And so I
Hmm.
was thinking, well, like to what you said with your example, you could literally, the bank not be at fault too, where like you've gotten this cashier's check
Hmm.
and then you create a duplicate check.
Hmm.
You uh give them the fraudulent check, but then you put a return for purposes not used or whatever. And
Yeah.
so the bank has, given you your money back, but then the title company has a duplicate check that's not even a real check. And they verify the check because they think it is the check. So
Absolutely.
I can see that being a whole thing. But yeah, I always wondered about that. So you just really wouldn't know. So what was I
But I
going?
just want to say for the viewers, that is highly illegal, not recommended. I mean, because banking is federal, and anything that is intentionally done to defraud the banks is going to be a federal crime. So it is. I don't want to. Some things happen. Like I said, that banker in our situation, they made an egregious error and they stopped pay on a check that they did not have in their possession. And it was a buyer that was having a fit about something small after the closing. I mean, let's just say there were still things in the garage, like something like that. And it kind of turned this thing on its head. And we're just like, you can't do that. And we were like, how was this bank able to do a stop pay on a check that they didn't have? So it did. It was the bank's fault. They're not supposed to be able to do that, not that quickly.
Yeah.
You can, people do lose cashier's checks. I mean, you can have it and it could fall out or you can accidentally shred it. So they do have to have some sort of system of replacing them. But there's an affidavit process. There are several steps that have to be taken before a bank would actually cancel a cashier's check.
Um, so question on that, because this was a long time ago, that was 2015.
Mhm.
When I worked for Chase, and I don't know the whole process, I was just a teller, but I would get, where they'd come in and they'd say, okay, I have to return this cashier's check. And I would have to do a stamp that would say, return something for not used for purposes intended. I think that's what it was.
Mhm.
And then it would just go in the paperwork. But I didn't know how quick that was or were not of a process. So you're saying it can take a few days before it actually.
Yeah, so Chase for a fact used to be 90 days.
Oh,
Like if they did a stop pay, it used to be 90 days. They've gotten much better. And it's not 90 days anymore, but they have an affidavit process. And the person whose account it is, they sign an affidavit as the affiant just saying that they have either lost the check or they give the reason why they're doing a stop pay, especially if they don't have the physical check. So they go through that process.
okay, so realistically, if they're giving the check back, then they wouldn't have been able to give because it would have been a duplicate check, but then they would have
Mhm.
said we have this check, or they would have processed it and the money still would have gone through because the numbers would have been the same. Um,
Absolutely.
that's good to know. Yeah, and to your point too, I mean, because realistically, if they're paying with a mortgage and not cash,
Mhm.
most likely there's going to be things that come up before you even get to the close and to even think that you have someone's going to give you a fraud
Absolutely.
cashier's check.
Mhm.
Okay, so while great realtors often help with the initial steps in working with clients to ensure they aren't trying to complete a fraudulent transaction, just
Mhm.
basic purposes of getting the right information and confirming things. Um, but what is your recommendation if for some reason there are realtors who aren't doing anything to prevent a fraudulent transaction? They're just trying to close a deal and whatever is easy, let's just do that. Um,
Those realtors don't
so
exist, right? um, so we, regardless, regardless to what our realtor partners tell us about a transaction, we do our research, we name search, we review recorded documents. Um, we do everything in our power to make sure that the person representing on the purchase contract as the seller is the person that was on title. So by doing that, we look for deaths, we look for incapacitation, we look for divorces, um, any other sorts of probate situations. So when we do name searches, we look for a plethora of things to see if there's any reason that this seller would not be the seller, or if we need additional documentation to verify that they can sell the home. So we do that on every single transaction, because at our core, we're an insurance company. And so we're going to do our due diligence. We're going to make sure that when we're insuring a transaction, we're going to lay out the requirements. And we're going to do our best to make sure that the person showing up to sign the deed is the person who has the authority to do so.
Okay. And I did have a deal a few years ago where the lender realized after the closing that the transaction was fraudulent.
Mhm.
And that was on the short end of it. It was mostly because he found a report on one of the buyers where he was a retired police officer and his ex-wife worked in something with credit repair, and somehow he was getting things off of their credit reports and things like that. And I think it's more like a strong belief that everything
Mhm.
he was sending to the lender was fraudulent because of how difficult it was to get things, and um how angry he would get about the requests.
Mhm.
Um, so if for some reason you do have a deal closed and you find out after the fact that it is fraudulent, um, what happens in that scenario?
We get our attorneys involved. I don't follow every situation when there has been fraud, but especially something like that, like there are federal protection laws for lenders and the documentation that they sign. I'm sorry, that they present for signature. So if it gets to the table and that person signs it, something as simple as the occupancy affidavit is mortgage fraud. So when buyers sign closing documents and they sign those documents in front of a notary, all of those things are done for the purpose of preventing fraud or holding your feet to the fire if you have done some fraud. So at that point, it becomes a legal matter and it is resolved legally. As the title company, we present and share all of our documentation with the legal authorities and with the legal process. And so from there, it could be a matter of incarceration. Obviously, if they weren't supposed to get the loan, the home, the bank could call due on sale, and that mortgage would need to be paid in full with cash, or they would start probably a judicial foreclosure process, or some other judicial process that omits and nullifies that person's interest in the property, and then the bank could sell it again. So everything, once that happens, just becomes a legal process.
Okay, and you're saying so in reality, it's at the end of the day because it was fraudulent, they're going to pretty much try to do what they can to reverse or
Oh, absolutely no. Christmas will be canceled. Most absolutely.
I mean, are you finding that in the mortgage fraud, it's less likely just because of all the steps in place now than there were so long ago, to get
Absolutely.
qualified?
Yeah, documentation, cross-reference, even AI. I'm sure lenders are using AI to cross-reference information. It's we you have ADP and other workforce services that are able to verify check stubs. So, you can no longer say you make $150,000 a year by fudging, check statements. It's more of a automated computer and verifiable process. So anyone that is getting away with it at this point, um, I would say they probably have intimate knowledge of the working, so they know the landmines to avoid in it.
Yeah, my thought is if you're doing all of that, I mean, you could probably make more money just with the job that would.
Exactly. Go work for the mortgage company to help stop it, and you'll make much more money and have a much bigger house.
Yeah. Okay. And speaking of AI, with the development of AI, what ways does Capital Title detect if the seller or buyer, if you're doing a closing remotely, like how we are right now, kind of like
Yeah.
Zoom, where it could be someone that's not actually the real person showing up for the closing, and they look just like the person and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for most of our remote online notaries, we use a company called Proof, and it's their specialization. So they're formerly known as Pavaso. And what they do is initially they do KBA questions. So that's going to be your knowledge based answer questions. So what car did you drive in 2010? What was your address in July of 2020? Like things like that. So fraudsters more than likely won't know those. Those are the same type of questions that your bank uses when you need to redo your password or if you're trying to get a copy of your credit report. So at this point, if someone has those answers, then they are going to more than likely know you intimately or they've completely stolen your ID. But here's the thing, they also do point protection and preview on your driver's license through things like the Secretary of State or DMV in other states. So there are several layers of verification that they do for the identification of the person, and they have AI working against the AI that's generating an image or the deep fake that's saying that this is the person.
It's good to know.
Mhm.
And then are there any free resources that homeowners can use to know the status of their title after the closing is done? Because that's one thing, if they don't have an Eagle title policy,
Mhm.
easier for things to come up that
Yeah.
really shouldn't be there.
Absolutely. So, in the metropolitan Detroit area, there is Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County. Each of them have fraud prevention departments, and each of them have fraud alerts on your title that you can sign up for absolutely free. So, any homeowner, no matter how many homes that you own, you can sign up for alerts with your tax parcel ID number. I believe each county requires your tax parcel ID number, which can be found on your tax bill. And you just sign up. Now, it doesn't prevent the fraud from happening. So they're at this point using a title company, using a reputable realtor, that's going to be your best way to prevent the fraud from happening. But it also lets you know if someone records a lien on your property. It lets you know if there's a mortgage that gets recorded on your property. And here's the thing, it doesn't have to be fraud. It could be an error in a legal description. So instead of lot 56, which could be your property, they could put lot 65. And so somehow a document gets erroneously recorded against another piece of property. And if you have that identification, then you can let your lender know because if it happens to you, it's going to slow down the sale of your home. So if you see something that belongs to someone else, or someone else sees something that belongs to another person, the best thing to do is alert the register of deeds or alert your lender, and so that they can get that corrected. Also, just a little tidbit, a lot of customers have a trust. So they go to an attorney and they create a trust. And the saddest thing to happen is that most people forget to fund their trust by recording the deed or having a deed prepared from themselves as an individual to their trust if that is their desire. And so sometimes when that person passes away, the family says, I know mom had a trust. She put the property in a trust. But if there's no deed to the trust, then it has to go through probate. So it's another way to make sure that your intentions and everything that you intended to happen actually happens. So if your attorney says, they're going to record a deed, or someone says they prepared this deed for you, or even if you send a document in, you should be able to anticipate some sort of notification if you signed up that that document is actually of record.
Yeah, yeah, that's a whole other thing to consider because a lot of times I do, if they want, yeah, the trust is important, but not knowing the other steps to make sure that everything goes into play. Because I'll get some people too that they think that just having the will is enough.
Mm-hmm.
No, you still have to go through probate. It's
No.
easier, but you still have to do it.
Yes. We'll talk about that next time.
Yeah, it's a whole nother thing. But okay, that's pretty much all I had. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No, I just want to thank you for having me and thank you for bringing attention to this. This is very serious. And the more people that we have being diligent and thoughtful and mindful of these sorts of things, the better it is for our industry overall and our protection of our customers.
Yeah, and I figured it was really good for now too because there's so much going on to where you could have a lot more fraud in general. And I think I skipped a question, sorry.
I don't know.
Is there anything else with technology that you expect can impact legitimacy of a transaction that Capital Title is already working on to prevent a foreseen fraudulent transaction in the
Yeah,
future?
absolutely. So we are rolling out a service called Homebase, and we are anticipating doing this on every transaction. And it's basically a portal. So buyers and sellers can put their information in. We will have one method of sending our stuff. So once a buyer or seller signs up, and they sign into the portal, then we can send wire instructions, we can take in wire instructions, we can do ID verification, we can do document verification, documents can be uploaded, that sort of thing. So we're using that. Obviously, everything now is AI based and changing, developing daily. With the changes of technology. So we incorporate these services to make sure that we're trying to stay ahead of all of the advances with our customers and clients.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And outside of their realtors, if anyone wants to get in touch with Capital Title with anything regarding their real estate transactions, how can they do that?
Sure. So I am primarily in the metropolitan area, Birmingham, Bloomfield, West Bloomfield, Royal Oak, but we do all properties. We service anywhere from Southeast Michigan, Southwest Michigan, the UP. We do it all as long as it's Michigan. And we do have partners in other states through our underwriter, so we can also help with a referral on that. I can be reached. My primary direct line is 248-385-0753. Christina Robinson, and my email address is crobinson@capital, spell with an A, title.net.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and happy early Halloween.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.